Hello everyone, my name is Ian McNaught. I am the Strategic Organisational Development Manager at the Scotland Excel Academy. So in this short video I'd like to talk about coacting, and with a suggestion that coacting is a viable way forward for the Scottish public sector community. This workshop was originally delivered online back in June, so this is workshop 2 of those which I am delivering, but it fits in with a much bigger portfolio of 41 Stay Connected online workshops that the whole Academy team is delivering. So what do we actually mean by coacting? So we'll start off with a dictionary definition, and it simply is to act or work together. So that's a basic definition, but in our national community, working across the country, it is quite a bit more than that. But if we underpin it with, it's simply for us to act together and or to work together. One of the big things we need to think about with co-action is the national network of people and the national network of different organisations. And there are going to be a plethora of dependencies and interdependencies. There's going to be a lot of established relationships, alliances, networks, and so on. And that's all good. But if we're going to coact, how do we really get the best from that? So if we think about coacting, all that I'm actually meaning by that is, how do we facilitate the type of environment nationally and regionally where we can co-create, co-produce, co-deliver and collaborate? And as we do all of those things, can we share expertise, resources, know-how? Can we share budgets? Can we share people resources? Can we align strategies and or merge them? What about our development plans? What about our current needs and what we expect or anticipate will be our future needs? What are our opportunities? What are our challenges and barriers? Is there a way that we can work together where we pool resources or learn from each other to actually be able to co-act in a way which is more productive, more cost effective than it is today? And we most probably are doing quite a lot of this already, but it's not always visible. So how can we learn from each other when it isn't visible, when we can't see it? And sometimes we might be a bit shy to share some of that. Sometimes there might be some political reasons why we don't currently want to share it at this time. Not that we won't ever share, but maybe it's not quite right at this time. But co-action is an opportunity for us to work beyond some of that, and that's what I would like to explore in this short video. I'm sure there are many examples of co-action, and I just wanted to share a few or a couple that Scotland Excel are involved in. So Scotland Excel, through the Academy, co-act with the Improvement Service. We co-create and co-deliver a project management programme, and we do the same with a programme in business analysis, decision making and innovation. So we're pooling resources, we're pooling expertise, we're creating content together, we're co-designing and we're co-delivering. And I think we are stronger for working in that way than we would be individually. Excuse me. Similarly, the Scotland Excel Academy works with the Scottish Government Property and Procurement Directorate on the National Procurement Development Framework. So that's existed for some time, and with the Academy and the Scottish Government working together, along with a wider group of people in the Professional Practice Development Forum, we have an app which automates some of that framework, and it makes it much more intuitive and much easier to use. And the ultimate output is an individual's personal development needs. So that gives us a tool which makes that type of reflective review much easier, and hopefully that therefore engages more people and we get much more use from it. We wouldn't have achieved what we've achieved working independently, not as much as we have actually co-acting. Now looking to the future, there are opportunities that come from that, where people identify their development needs. We can co-act and co-create and co-deliver future development programmes that align to that framework. So if I have a need to develop my leadership skills, I can be signposted to a number of sources of content, workshops, self-directed learning, structured and unstructured learning, and so on. And that is the idea as we grow together. Last example, back in August 2019, we launched what we call Coacting. It's an initiative striving to get a number of us across the national community willing to work together and simply to co-act in its various component forms. Now, we started with a draft 3-year development roadmap representing national needs, and we were trying to capture what people are actually delivering today, what they would look to be delivered in year 2, and what they anticipate their needs would be in year 3, if we have that much visibility that far into the future. And the intention is this is something that we will continually evolve, and hopefully we can grow that co-acting community. Obviously, with the current pandemic, this has not been possible to bring people together face to face. So back in August 2019, with 30 organisations comprising 56 people. So in 2021, we'll look to actually create Coacting 2021 online. We had to actually suspend the activity in 2020. But this is a big opportunity for us to work together, understand each other's expertise, needs, resources, potentially budget, and we could part fund different activities as we co-create, co-deliver, co-produce and collaborate. Why do we want to do this? So if you've been in some of the other workshops, I'll confess that some of the content repeats, or bits of it repeat, and some of the images will be the same, just to try and stimulate our thinking. But let's kick off then with wicked problems. They're really complex, they're not easy to define, and they are very hard to solve. And many of them have been around for decades, and we've invested multi-millions of pounds, if not billions, trying to solve some of these. They can be very political. It can be difficult to get people's buy-in where they don't think there is a solution because they've been around for 15 years, or maybe the solution is not palatable because it disrupts certain other things in our community and our environment. And these problems will require some budget. They're a complex problem, so perhaps they're perceived as being too expensive. There's often not any immediate or ultimate test of a wicked problem. So if we implement something to fix the problem or to minimise it, how will we know if it's been successful or not? We might believe or perceive we know what success looks like, but how will we know we've actually fixed it? And one of the key things here is, once we've fixed the thing we can see, it is very possible that what we then uncover, or what we then can see, is a much bigger problem than what we started with. And the perception of that can be quite challenging. So for these reasons, they're very, very complex, but also for these reasons, we can't solve them on our own. No one person, no one team, no one organisation is likely to have sufficient expertise and know-how to solve wicked problems. So that co-acting approach, that collaborative approach, is really quite essential for complex problems, for complex wicked problems. The current pandemic of COVID-19 obviously gives us quite a significant challenge, or a very significant challenge. And the question about co-action is, how do we co-act to thrive? Whatever our new normal will look like, how can we create an optimum environment, way of working as we look to the future? Now, I have used one of these slides before, the one in the top left, and I'll repeat something that I've said before in a different workshop, that I absolutely respect the current pandemic is a crisis and it's affecting people's lives. Some people are losing their livelihoods, some people are dying, and that is completely tragic, and I'm completely respectful of that. The rationale of thinking about crisis does respect that, but it asks us to think in a slightly different way. If we can, it asks us to take the emotion out of this and try and look at this objectively about what we can do. And many different people have said this. This quote, I've used this from CMI and from Cornell, but many people have said it, and it's simply never waste a good crisis. And we might not like that language, but the thinking here is, when we encounter a crisis situation, there are many occasions where things we've been trying to do for some time, but maybe we could get it approved, either resources and or the budget, or that new way of working we wanted to explore or try out or experiment with didn't gain sufficient support. But very often when we're in a crisis situation, that changes because we have to fix something, or we must make progress. And there's normally a realization in the crisis that, well, the way we have been working up until now isn't fit for purpose for the future. So respectfully, let's think about a crisis and figure out together what we can do about that. Excuse me, hopefully to solve the problems, and if not, make them less of a problem, part solve them. Now, I ask you to think about the image in the top right. In March 2020, most of us were working in an office environment, and we had face-to-face contact with our colleagues, with our peers, with our stakeholders, with our superiors. And for most of us now, we don't, because we're all working remotely. So technology will play a bigger part of what we do going forward, is a belief. You might not agree with me, and that's fine, because we need to adapt to what our normal is. So March 2020, our norm was face-to-face. Some people say we are currently working remotely, most people working from home. This is our new norm. And that's using Microsoft Teams, it's using Zoom, it's using many other pieces of software for digital connection and interactivity and sharing screens and interactive whiteboards and all of that. And some people say, well, actually where we are is an interim state and this isn't our new norm. Well, can we co-act to shape that new norm? Knowing what you know, knowing a bit of what I know, knowing a bit about the other 32 organisations, the other hundreds of thousands of people. Those who are motivated to, I'll go back. Those who are motivated to share what they know, what they think, what they're challenged with, what is our new norm? And how can we make that as good as it can be? Now, our work environment is changing, our work practices will change by the inclusion of a stronger digital provision. We still need some face-to-face for sure. And there's nothing as good to face-to-face. Digital's not quite the equivalent yet, but when the technology works well, it's close. What do we need? What do we need as a nation? And is that co-acting with all of the local authorities and government and the digital office and others to give us the ultimate environment we can currently see? And in 2020, maybe we can implement a version of that, but maybe in 2022, that's very different. Our thinking doesn't need to be constrained. Our actions might be constrained with what approval we can get, with which resources we have, with what money, what budget we've got available. But we can certainly scope out together an optimal situation, and then we can figure out how do we implement this. And is it one iteration? Is it 50 iterations? Is it a 6-month plan? Is it a 10-year plan? Nothing's off limits when we're actually scoping out and trying to work together creatively. We then have to bring that practical dimension into it to go and implement something which we can actually get buy-in for and then implement. If we think about our national community, so we're thinking specifically about the Scottish public sector, and the image in the middle simply illustrates the headquarters of 32 local authorities across the country. So it shows us where there are clusters, it shows us where there are geographical distributions. It certainly should help us think about rural needs, and island needs are very different from city centre needs. But there also will be quite a lot of commonality. We're all serving communities to the best of our abilities, trying to deliver the most valuable service we can with the funds and people we've got available and the expertise and knowledge that we have. So the rationale is very, very common. There definitely will be different geographical needs, social, demographic, economic needs, etc. And we acknowledge all of that. If you think about the people in the community across the Scottish public sector in a country the size of ours, Scottish government data says there are more than 561,000 people employed in the Scottish public sector. Of this image of 32 local authorities, there are 245,000 people employed across those 32 local government organisations. And there's nearly 82,000 third sector people from the third sector working in the public sector. And then if you bring the dimension of the NHS into it, There's more than 163,000 people in NHS Scotland. And I appreciate there's some specialisms of expertise in there, with some very specialist roles, but there is a lot of commonality over all that as well. And if we can co-act in a way that's better than we do today, there is a massive number of hundreds of thousands of people of significant expertise and experience that we can bring what we know to bear working together. And if we could do that by pulling things and maybe eliminating the chance that we go down a path that is likely to fail, or we learn from each other's previous practices experience, then that would be a good thing. When I delivered this workshop back in June, there was 16 people from 9 different organisations, and we were having that online discussion and thought from some of this material. If you look at that image here, it's fair to say there's 32 local authority organisations, and if we think about that, that means there are 32 executive teams. There are also 32 senior management teams. And if I'm thinking about co-acting and people development and organisational development that can implement, that's a mechanism to implement new ways of working to solve some of the problems, then there's also 32 learning and development teams, and there's also 32 organisational development teams. And yes, we could go on to HR and different operational teams, etc. My point is there'll be a lot of different views. There'll be many interdependencies and interdependencies, but if we can find a way of co-acting, we potentially can get the best from most situations. And that's what this image is trying to bring across. Now, maybe the title sounds a bit negative about what stops us co-acting, or we can flip that around and say, let's think about this and let's figure out what will support us and facilitate us co-acting. So this is based on McKinsey's 7S model, where it's trying to illustrate the variation and the potential quantity of dependencies and interdependencies. So very, very little works in isolation or operates in isolation. And this is just trying to capture some things that might be at play across our public sector organisation or public sector community that we should give some thought to. There is no question, because it's all about people, there's egos. And there's no question there are empires where people are very proud of their organisation, their operation, how they support the local community, their wider geographical community. It's human nature that this will exist. There are also, well, I'll start from vision. So in every senior leadership team, there'll be a vision about how that organisation should conduct itself, what its values are, what it's trying to achieve, and that extends from vision into mission, the purpose of that organisation, and then into strategy and operating plan. And these obviously are interconnected. Those visions might be very different from a city centre community versus a rural community, but there probably is quite a lot of commonality there as well. And those visions underpin a strategy, and we've got a leadership team who are supporting, facilitating, influencing all the behaviours of all the people to be able to successfully implement that strategy, and obviously the vision that comes before that. We should also think about leadership in that it's not simply the hierarchical structure, and it's certainly not only the people with a formal leadership title. Informal leadership and distributed leadership, whatever you want to call that, we all can lead if we're motivated to do so. Maybe we have to learn new stuff to be able to do that. Maybe we already have that expertise vested in us already, but that leadership at all levels is crucially important for that. Are we motivated to work together, to co-act? Are our egos at stake? Do we actually want to be a bit more reserved than that and simply do our own thing in their own way, in their own organisation? If I could learn from your practice, I could be more effective in what I currently do. Or do I take the view that says, well, we never invented that, it's not invented here, so we don't want to use that? So I appreciate I've only highlighted 7 variables here, but if you think about this and reflect on it, we could probably come up with 700. And there certainly are dependencies and interdependencies on each. We might not want to think of things in this way. You know, we've got perceptions, we've got different values, and we might not want to think about reflecting on if some of these things really do happen, or are we motivated to think about that and do things in different ways? So maybe I shouldn't have titled this slide "What Stops Us Coacting," but how can we coact more effectively, or how can we scale up our coaction? Because we are facing similar problems. We all expect we are facing significant budget challenges as a consequence of the pandemic. Every single organisation is going to face that in the public sector, so that's common. So how can we use our expertise, know-how, and how can we be best motivated to apply what we might know as a community for the greater good of Scotland? Accepting this is highly complex, and nobody can do it justice in just a basic diagram, but there's a lot we can do together. What does that really mean about coacting then? So if we're going to think how to solve difficult problems, wicked problems, problems that result as a consequence of the pandemic and of a crisis, and let's be fair, all of the challenges we had before the pandemic occurred, the important thing here is it's about us applying our most complex thinking in our normal jobs. It's not saying this is something very different and we have to create a new project where we can actually go and coact. It's absolutely not that. But it is saying, how can our leaders who have the influence and authority to make things happen create the type of work environment conditions that gives us the opportunity to go and explore how we might work together? Somebody's thought something through and has got a good idea. How do we work together and build upon that? And perhaps agree some people to work on it as resources, maybe agree some money to support that. But that's certainly, it might be a change of a working practice, or we might be doing that very well already, in which case, how do we make that more visible so we can each learn from it? So it's about sharing or exchanging resources. How do we know what knowledge we've got? Well, we've got things like the Scotland Excel Academy. We've got other equivalent provision in other organisations in the public sector. We've got the Knowledge Hub and more. How do we actually make that as visible as we can? Without making it sound too formal, it is about facilitating mutual learning so we can actually create options which have got a chance of success. So that's really just about us working together, learning new stuff that we didn't know before, and applying it in a way that gives us a chance of success. But we won't always agree. In fact, we'll very rarely all agree. In fact, we probably will never all agree. So therefore, it's not about trying for forever to try and get us all to agree. I mean, that would just wear us out. It would be very time consuming and it would be pretty demoralising. So it's not about that unanimous agreement at all. So it's actually about constructively managing our differences. As peers, as stakeholders, it's about thinking about what common ground do we have? Where is the commonality that we're each facing? And how can we work together to solve some of these problems or lessen some of the problems? You know, if we're thinking about wicked problems that we covered in a previous workshop, they're highly complex and very difficult. Not one of us or one organisation will be able to solve them in our own, but we've got a better chance of it if we can actually properly coact and share the costs, the people hours, the challenge of coacting, but also share the rewards and be able to actually implement whichever outcomes come from that. There's a lot of things to think about in coaction, and even in a kind of geographically small country like Scotland, you know, there's hundreds of thousands of people, as we've already illustrated, and there's a lot of complexity in there. But can we identify what our common interests are? Can we identify if there's any alignment between our stakeholders? And if we consider we're all stakeholders, by that I mean, are we aligned to any specific things? You know, are we trying to be more productive so that we can deliver more with the resources we have? Are we trying to work in new ways because we know we need to reduce the costs because we've got budget challenges both today and probably bigger ones just around the corner? Is it visible to us what's dependent on something else and what's interdependent? And as we tackle things, we're not going to solve these significant problems in one go. So do we have the appetite to break it down into phases, into different iterations, and work through them in a planned way with a look at our environment continually, because things might happen that change our priorities or change our approach. And so we might actually reprioritise things. If we're working in a phased approach or in different iterations, then we have the flexibility to do that within our governance structures and within our approval structures. We won't all agree. How do we resolve those disputes? And very importantly, what trust have we established between the people, the teams, the organisations, and how do we both build and sustain that? Because there's lots and lots and lots of clever people that have demonstrated that trust is one of the most important things. So we'll probably continue to be more resilient and to keep working forward if we trust each other. And I think that has to be underpinned with what each of us brings to the table and what we invest in terms of people resources and perhaps also financial resources. If it's a bit imbalanced or very imbalanced, it's going to cause us some problems in trust. But equally, whatever we gain from that work, we share amongst us. We definitely should recognise the contribution of the people and the organisations. It may not be equal, and we should be clear to say that, but we're still co-acting as a team, so there's a greater return across all of us. So how do we share and manage knowledge? How do we know what each other knows? And I know we're all very busy, so how can we create some mechanisms to co-act? Now, the draft national roadmap was one of the early pieces of work to try and help us establish that. And it's certainly in its infancy, and obviously we haven't had the opportunity to move that forward in 2020, and our plan is to do that in 2021. But that national development roadmap was identifying what our current development needs are, what we are currently delivering as 32 separate organisations, 32 separate L&D departments and OD departments, and how we might be able to come together to look for the next year and the year after about what we need. And if we all need a programme in leadership and management, but transactional leadership, and if we all need a programme in transformational leadership, if there's a need for project management, whichever discipline, then do we all need to be delivering it? Or can we actually come together and co-create and co-deliver? And we can probably reduce our costs. We probably can deliver a higher quality programme by each contributing to it. And in our current ways of working online, it might give us a bigger opportunity as well. There were some limitations before about travelling. Either people couldn't travel or there wasn't a budget for travel. If we can have good online systems, big blue button software, MS Teams software, Zoom and things like that, then the geographical barriers go away. So how do we continue to develop that? And if we co-act and collaborate, we can still work autonomously. And some of us will need that autonomy. So we might work both together and autonomously and come back and forth. The productive role of difference, appreciating conflict and getting some benefit from the diversity of us as people is absolutely crucial. But so is the approach to risk. And it's often said that the public sector is risk averse and or can be bureaucratic. If we are going to do things in new ways through co-acting, we need to be able to take a different view of risk, explore different ways of working, implement what we think is worth implementing, has a chance of success, or we'll learn something by doing this, and then we'll regroup and post-mortem and look for a different iteration that takes us a step further forward again. If we take that restrictive risk assessment which is valid in certain places, and we're all taught to think about the probability of the risk and the impact and what the mitigation will be and what the contingency is, that has its place to understand our environment, and that has its place certainly in creating and managing risk registers. But for us to explore new ways of working as we co-act, We have to avoid that type of thinking because the probability of failure might be high, but we don't know until we don't try. And if we've agreed our collective best knowledge is to do A, B, and C, then we need to have the proactiveness and the motivation to go and give that a go. The other part to think about, which is a much bigger discussion, so I'm only going to touch on it fairly lightly, is where do we learn new stuff from? And hopefully that's from each other, whether we're co-acting or not. There are hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of data sources. So where do we acquire new knowledge from? And once we have acquired that knowledge, so we need to learn about a specific thing to address the problem we've got, and maybe we acknowledge, we have a knowledge, maybe we acknowledge we lack some knowledge. That's not a nice way to say that, is it? But we know there's stuff we don't know. So we acquire some new knowledge, and then we should think about how would that work in an organisation or in our team or in our working group. And we might think, well, we don't really value that way of working, or we've tried that approach before and it didn't succeed, and we're a bit hesitant to go that way again. So there's simulations about synthesising it and adapting it, how we can use that in our environment with the people we're working with, so we transform it into something more useful for us, for our team, our working group, our organisation. But then we're going to exploit it. And exploit is actually meant in quite a very constructive way, that we actually go and implement that and we create some value from it. And then we should step back and reflect on that. It's a bit like plan, do, check and act. We've done all of that, so did it work? And if it did work, our natural tendency would be to embed that as business as usual and make that our new working practice, and let's get as much value from that as we can until the next time when someone gets a better way of doing it, or can incrementally improve that, or somebody completely disrupts that way of working and comes up with a much better way. So that brings exploration into it, where we go and experiment and try things out. And there needs to be an appetite at the individual level to do that, and there absolutely needs to be an appetite at the organisational level. Now, we can't exploit and explore at the same time. It isn't possible. But most people can both exploit and explore. Think of it as a continuum. Sometimes you're exploiting, you're implementing standard practice, the way we've developed to do that, and then we explore to try out or implement something new that's worth trying, that might be more valuable than how we currently exploit it. And it's a cycle that actually should go on for forever. Now, none of us has got all the knowledge to do this, and certainly none of us can solve these complex, wicked problems on our own, but we've got a much better chance if we can co-act. And if there is both a political will and a leadership will to find that way of working. So, thinking about that, there's certainly a request from me for us to keep talking, whether that means it's a forum like this, or it's an online workshop, and it's a face-to-face workshop. It's all of that, and all of the development programs that we're all delivering. How can we explore things together? How can we share our challenges and opportunities? I might have a challenge that you've already solved, but I don't know that. Well, if we could keep talking, I've got a chance of knowing it, or we share it in the Knowledge Hub, or how do we grow into the future and whatever our new norm will be, and a way to do this? Is that showcasing people's work with good practice? Is that online videos? Is that online workshops? Whatever it is could be up to us. There's a lot of common needs, definitely a lot of common needs, and maybe some specialisms and some exceptions too, but there's definitely a lot of common needs. So if we could work together in a co-acting way, we've got a chance of solving them in better ways. Whatever our new norm's going to be, whatever life is going to be like as we come out of the pandemic, how do we thrive in that type of environment? How does each local authority thrive? How do we as individuals thrive? How does the Scottish public sector thrive together to support our whole nation? Let's not forget about trust. If we can build and sustain that trust, we will work together more effectively, and we'll be much more willing to give challenging things an attempt. And what about our national community? So the three images at the bottom is just trying to bring across the 32 organisations, more than 500,000 people employed across the public sector, 250,000 almost across the 32 local authorities. There will be a lot of dependencies and interdependencies, some of which we know because we can see them or we know of them, they're visible, and some of it we don't know because something's happening we don't understand yet. But if we go and explore in a co-acting way, we've got a chance of better understanding it and then improving it, doing something about it. The image on the right is just trying to bring through, we're all working online, and there's an opportunity to gain some traction and advantage from that. I'm not suggesting online's perfect, but I am suggesting it takes away quite a number of barriers that we had before. So for example, the number of development programs we deliver as an academy, and people would physically come to Paisley and we would deliver face-to-face in the academy. That's a very effective way of working. We can't do that at the moment. So everything is online. So we're using different pieces of software to replicate the face-to-face interactions as close as we can. But that means that we've got people from the Shetland Islands participating in programs which they couldn't do before. So there are opportunities if we can find the most effective way of working online, and let's try and grasp that and figure it out together. This slide is showing the front page of the Academy. There's a lot of information, knowledge and know-how available in the public domain. I'm giving you the Academy link up there if you didn't know it before, but there's a lot of information there that's accessible. If you want to share some information, we've got an area of sharing practice and you would get the credit for that. So it's another way of doing it. Of course, there's a knowledge hub and other platforms as well. Leave my contact details if you've got needs or want to discuss anything, other opportunities where we could co-act. I would be delighted to have that discussion with you. So leave that there if you wanted to get in touch. And any literature that I've used throughout this short talk, then I'm referencing here. So it's not the Academy's work, where we're obviously building in others' work. And if you wanted to investigate it in more detail, then you have all the sources there. Thank you very much. Hope to speak to you soon.